My name is Ethan. I'm 38 years old and I own a moderately successful video game development studio, a company I built from nothing with my own two hands and about 1 million hours of lost sleep. For most of my life, my family saw my career as a joke, a boyish hobby that I stubbornly refused to outgrow. But that all changed the day my parents passed away and we were summoned to their lawyer's office to hear the reading of their will. I sat there in a stuffy leather chair, watching my younger sister Chloe trying to look sad while practically vibrating with anticipation. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Albright who had known our family for decades, cleared his throat and avoided my gaze. And then he read the words that served as the final, posthumous slap in the face from the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Everything, he said, the sprawling 6-bedroom house I grew up in, the stocks, the savings, the cars, the art, every last penny was left to my sister, Chloe. My name was mentioned only once, in a single, brutal sentence: to our son, Ethan, we leave our love and best wishes, knowing his independent spirit has already secured his future, while our darling Chloe will need this support to maintain the life she deserves. They left me nothing. Not a photograph, not a keepsake, not a dollar. After a lifetime of being the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who was never enough, this was their final verdict. And as Chloe shot me a look of pity mixed with undeniable triumph, I didn't feel anger, not at first. I felt a strange, cold clarity. I finally understood that their love was never a prize I could win, it was a rigged game from the start. Before I tell you how I handled this ultimate betrayal and what happened when Chloe discovered the truth behind her grand inheritance, do me a favor. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, hit that like button, and please subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was the wallpaper of my childhood, the very air we breathed in that big, beautiful house. Chloe was the masterpiece, and I was the rough draft that got shoved in a drawer. I was 4 years old when she was born, and I remember the shift happening almost overnight. Suddenly, the world revolved around this tiny, screaming infant who my parents declared was a porcelain doll, a perfect creation. My own small achievements, like learning to read early or building intricate Lego cities that covered the entire living room floor, were met with a distracted "That's nice, honey, but can you do it more quietly?" Chloe's napping her first smile was photographed and framed. My first place trophy from a school spelling bee ended up in a box in the garage. It was 1,000 tiny cuts. When Chloe was 7, she decided she wanted to be a ballerina. My parents spared no expense, importing a tutor from the city, buying her a closet full of leotards, and renovating the guest room into a dance studio with a mirrored wall and a bar. She quit after 6 months because it was too hard. The studio then became her art room, filled with expensive canvases and paint she'd use once and abandon. Meanwhile, when I was 10 and showed a frantic passion for computers, begging for a programming course at the local community center, my father clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Son, your time is better spent outside. Go throw a ball around. All that screen time will rot your brain." I saved up my allowance for months to buy a book on basic programming and taught myself in the dark, long after they thought I was asleep. That became the pattern of my life. Her whims were investments, my passions were frivolous distractions. This dynamic only intensified as we got older. Our 16th birthdays are a perfect, painful example. For Chloe's 16th, my parents threw a catered party that rivaled a wedding reception. They rented a hall, hired a DJ, and the centerpiece of the evening was when my dad led everyone outside to the driveway, where a brand new, cherry-red convertible sat gleaming under a giant bow. Chloe screamed, cried, and hugged them. It was a scene straight out of a movie. For my 16th birthday 2 years prior, I got a sensible sweater and a card with a $100 bill in it. When I mentioned I'd been saving up for a car, my dad said, "That's great, Ethan. Shows initiative. A man earns his own way, so I did." I got a job bussing tables at a diner and spent a year saving every greasy dollar until I could afford a 10-year-old Toyota with a rust problem and a suspicious rattling sound. I was proud of that car, but I'll never forget the look on my mother's face when I pulled it into the driveway. It was a faint, almost imperceptible curl of her lip. It was disappointment. She didn't say anything, but I could hear her thinking, "Of course that's the car he would have." When it came time for college, the gap between us became a chasm. Chloe, who had mediocre grades but a ton of charm, was accepted into a prestigious and wildly expensive private art history program 3 states away. My parents mortgaged the house to pay for her tuition and living expenses, beaming with pride. For me, the conversation was very different. "Look, Ethan," my father said, sitting me down at the kitchen table. "Your mother and I think that with your interests, a 4-year university might be a waste of money. The community college here has a perfectly good computer science program. You can live at home, save money, and figure out if this little hobby of yours is actually going anywhere." The message was clear: she was the investment, I was the liability. I was the responsible one who could take care of himself, which was their justification for never having to take care of me. I didn't go to the community college. I packed 2 duffel bags, emptied my meager savings account of about $2,000, and moved into the cheapest apartment I could find in the city, 3 hours away from their suffocating expectations. The first few years were brutal. I worked 2 jobs, one delivering pizzas until 2 a.m., and another stocking shelves at a grocery store at dawn. In between, I fueled myself with cheap coffee and taught myself advanced coding, devouring every textbook and online tutorial I could find. I was lonely and exhausted, but for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of purpose that was entirely my own. My parents' phone calls were infrequent and always followed the same script. "Are you eating enough? Are you sure you don't want to just come home? Your old room is still here." It wasn't concern, it was a desire for me to admit defeat, to come back to the fold where they could comfortably label me as the son who couldn't quite make it. It was during this time that I met Sarah, my wife. She was a waitress at a coffee shop where I'd spend hours nursing a single cup while using their free Wi-Fi. She saw past my worn-out clothes and the permanent exhaustion in my eyes. She'd bring me refills I didn't pay for and ask me about the lines of code on my screen. She was the first person who didn't call it a hobby. She called it my art. "You're building worlds, Ethan," she'd say. That's incredible. Her belief in me was a lifeline. She saw potential where my parents only saw failure. With her encouragement, I started applying for jobs at game studios. I got 100 rejections, but finally, one small indie company offered me a position as a junior quality assurance tester. It was grunt work, finding bugs in other people's games. But it was a foot in the door. I had never been happier. For 5 years, I poured everything I had into that job. I wasn't just a tester, I was a student. I stayed late, I talked to designers, I learned from the programmers, I submitted my own ideas, most of which were ignored. My parents barely acknowledged my career. When I'd tell them about a game I was working on, my mother would politely listen and then immediately change the subject to Chloe's latest European vacation or her new, expensive handbag. My success was measured in my own satisfaction, not their approval, a lesson I was slowly learning to embrace. Sarah and I got married in a simple ceremony at City Hall. My parents came, but they looked uncomfortable, out of place among our small group of friends from the studio. My dad shook my hand and said, "Well, son, I hope you know what you're doing." The implication hung in the air. Tying myself to a waitress while still playing games for a living was not the future they'd envisioned. The turning point came when the studio I worked for was bought out by a major corporation. The entire culture changed overnight. The creativity was stifled, replaced by board meetings and marketing analytics. I was miserable. One night, I came home, utterly defeated, and told Sarah I wanted to quit. I had an idea for a game, a passion project I'd been sketching out for years. I wanted to start my own studio. It was a massive risk. We'd have to use all our savings and take out a second mortgage on our small house. Without hesitating, Sarah looked at me and said, "Let's do it." I've never been more sure of anything in my life, so we did. The first 2 years were even harder than my early days in the city. We lived on instant noodles. But we launched our first game, a small, narrative-driven puzzle game. It didn't break any sales records, but it got rave reviews from critics and developed a cult following. That was enough to fund our second project, which was more ambitious. That second game, Starlight Echo, was the one that changed everything. It became a surprise global hit. Suddenly, that failed son was making headlines in tech journals and flying to conferences. Money was no longer an issue. I called my parents to share the news, my voice trembling with a pathetic, residual need for their validation. My dad's response? "That's great, son." "Really?" "Hey, listen, your sister's car is making a funny noise. You know about these things, any chance you could take a look at it this weekend?" The phone call came on a Tuesday morning. It was a police officer with a calm, practiced voice. There had been an accident on the interstate. A pile-up in the fog. It was instantaneous, he said. My parents were gone. The shock was a physical thing, a punch to the gut that knocked the air out of my lungs. Grief is a strange, complicated beast, especially when your relationship with the deceased is a tangled mess of love, resentment, and unfulfilled longing. Sarah held me as I processed the news, not crying, just sitting in a numb silence. The funeral was a blur of casseroles and condolences from people who barely knew me. They all told me what wonderful, generous people my parents were. I just nodded. Chloe was the star of the show, naturally. She performed her grief beautifully, a tragic, weeping daughter in a chic black dress. I, the stoic, quiet son, was seen as cold, distant. People patted my arm and told me it was okay to be sad. They didn't understand that my sadness was for a relationship I never had, for the parents I always wanted but never got. A week after the funeral, Mr. Albright, the family attorney, called. He asked for both Chloe and me to come to his office for the reading of the will. I wasn't expecting anything. I assumed it would be an even split, the final act of parental obligation. I drove to his office in the city, the same one I'd been to as a child when my father was signing business papers. The leather chairs still smelled the same. Chloe was already there, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. She gave me a weak, watery smile that didn't reach her eyes. We sat in silence until Mr. Albright came in, his face grim. He sat behind his enormous mahogany desk, put on his reading glasses, and opened the document. He read through the legal preamble, and then he got to the disposition of assets. His eyes flickered towards me for a split second, an almost imperceptible apology, before he focused on the page and read the words that would detonate the rest of our lives. To my beloved daughter, Chloe, a woman of grace and taste, I bequeath the entirety of my estate. He listed it all. The house, the portfolio, the accounts. And then came my part. That single, devastating line about my independent spirit. When he finished, the silence in the room was absolute. Chloe let out a small, theatrical gasp, a masterpiece of feigned surprise. I just stared at the wall, at a framed print of a sailboat on a calm sea. It wasn't about the money. I didn't need it. It was the intention. It was the final, definitive statement of my worth in their eyes. Nothing. I was worth nothing to them. Chloe broke the silence. "Oh, Ethan," she breathed, her voice dripping with the faux sympathy she had perfected over a lifetime. "I had no idea. I'm just shocked. They must have just assumed it, you know, because you're so successful now." She reached a hand across the desk as if to touch my arm, but I leaned back, out of her reach. The lawyer, Mr. Albright, was shuffling papers, clearly desperate to be anywhere else. He mumbled something about finalizing the paperwork and that he would be in touch with Chloe's financial advisor. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely steady. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. I looked directly at my sister, probably for the first time without the filter of hope or sibling affection. I saw her for what she was, the willing and happy recipient of a lifetime of unfairness. "Don't, Chloe," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the room. "Don't pretend you're surprised. You've been waiting for this your whole life." Her face hardened, the mask of the grieving daughter falling away to reveal the familiar pout of entitlement. "That is a horrible thing to say," she snapped. "How can you be so greedy? Mom and Dad are barely gone, and you're already thinking about money? It's just like them to know you wouldn't need this. You have all your little computer game millions. This is for me, to help me live. They were just looking out for me. That's when I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp and bitter. Greedy? I repeated, the word tasting like poison. You, who has never worked a real day in your life, who had her car, her college, her entire life handed to her on a silver platter, are calling me greedy. This was never about the money. You know that. This is about this. I gestured between the two of us. This has always been the arrangement. You were the princess to be cared for, and I was the workhorse who was expected to fend for himself. And the one time I needed them, the one time I asked for help to go to college, they told me to figure it out on my own. So I did. And this is their final thank you. It's their last message to me, loud and clear. You were right, Ethan. You were always on your own. I turned to leave. At the door, I looked back at her. Her face was pale with fury. I'm not going to contest it, Chloe. It's all yours. The house, the money, all of it. Enjoy it. You've certainly earned it. I walked out of that office and didn't look back. For the first time, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The chain of hope, the desperate, lifelong quest for their approval, had been decisively severed. It hurt, but it was a clean break. I went home to Sarah, told her everything, and she just held me. Their loss, Ethan, she whispered. It was always their loss. We didn't hear from Chloe for about a month. I assumed she was busy meeting with decorators and financial planners, reveling in her new status as the lady of the manor. Life for us went on. My studio was in the middle of a major expansion. I was busy, focused, and for the first time, completely free from the psychic weight of my family's judgment. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was Chloe. Her voice wasn't smug or condescending. It was high-pitched with panic. Ethan, you have to help me, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. It's a disaster. It's all a complete disaster. I sat down, a strange sense of ironic premonition washing over me. What's a disaster, Chloe? I asked calmly. The money, she shrieked. The estate. It's a sham. The house has a massive second mortgage on it. Dad's stock portfolio was leveraged to the hilt, and he had credit card debt. Ethan, he had so much debt. The lawyer said that after everything is settled, there won't be much left. And the taxes on the house, the upkeep. I can't afford it. I'm going to have to sell everything just to break even. I might even owe money. It turned out our parents weren't just masters of emotional manipulation, they were masters of financial illusion. They had been living a lie, maintaining a facade of wealth that was built on a mountain of debt. The cherry-red convertible, the European vacations, the designer clothes, all bought on credit. They left Chloe the idea of a mansion, the symbol of wealth, but the reality was a crumbling, expensive trap. They did this to me, she sobbed into the phone. How could they do this to me? I listened to her cry, and I didn't feel pity. I didn't even feel anger. I felt a profound, cosmic sense of irony. They had spent their lives propping up their perfect porcelain doll, and with their final act, they had left her a bill for the entire charade. I need you to help me, she said, her voice shifting from panic to demanding. You have money. You can cover the mortgage until I figure things out. It's the least you can do. It's what Mom and Dad would have wanted. That was the moment of truth. The old Ethan, the one who spent his life craving a crumb of their approval, might have caved. He would have seen it as a chance to finally be the hero, to swoop in and save the day and maybe, just maybe, earn their posthumous respect. But the man who walked out of that lawyer's office was different. I let her finish her frantic, entitled plea. I let the silence hang in the air for a few long seconds. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it was made of steel. Chloe was so shocked she stopped crying. What did you say? She stammered. I said no, Chloe. I am not going to give you money to maintain a lifestyle that our parents couldn't even afford. I am not going to bail you out of this, but you're my brother, she cried, her voice escalating into a wail of disbelief. This isn't fair. You have everything. I have what I built, I corrected her, my own voice rising but staying firm. I have what I earned while you were at art galas. I have what I sacrificed for while you were on vacation. The will was very clear, Chloe. They wanted you to have everything. Well, this is everything. The assets and the liabilities. Their whole life was a performance, and you were the lead actress. The show is over, and now you have to pay the stagehands. I told her I would meet her for coffee the next day. I wouldn't give her a handout, but I would offer her a lifeline, on my terms. We met at a neutral cafe downtown. She looked terrible. The designer clothes hung on her, and her eyes were puffy and red. I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a proposal. I told her I would hire a top financial advisor, at my expense, to help her liquidate the estate properly and minimize the losses. I would also offer her a personal loan, not a gift. It would be for a modest amount, enough to secure a small apartment and get her back on her feet, with a clear repayment plan and a fair interest rate. It was a business deal. I was offering her a hand up, not a handout. She stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. A loan, she whispered, her voice full of contempt. You want me to pay you back? Yes, I said. It's called responsibility. Welcome to the real world, Chloe. It's where I've been living all along. She didn't accept right away. She stormed out of the coffee shop, accusing me of being cruel and vindictive. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. I honestly thought she would rather go bankrupt out of sheer pride than accept help that came with accountability. But reality has a way of wearing down even the most stubborn pride. She called me, her voice small and defeated, and accepted my terms. The next few months were a difficult education for her. The financial advisor I hired was ruthless and efficient. The grand mansion was sold, its contents auctioned off. The fancy cars were repossessed. Chloe had to watch as the entire fantasy world her parents had built for her was dismantled piece by piece. She ended up with enough to pay off the debts and a very small amount left over. She used my loan to get a 2-bedroom apartment in a modest suburb, a world away from the gated community she was used to. For the first time in her 34 years, she had to get a job. She works as a receptionist at an art gallery now. She hates it. But she's doing it. She makes her loan payment to me on the 1st of every month, without fail. Our relationship is not warm. It's not fuzzy. We don't have cozy family dinners. But it's honest. For the first time, there are no illusions between us. The will that was meant to be my final insult turned out to be my greatest gift. It freed me. It forced me to finally stop looking over my shoulder for an approval that would never come. My life with Sarah is full and happy. My company is thriving. My happiness is my own, built on a foundation of my own making, not inherited. I realized that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And my parents' final act of indifference set me free. They left me nothing, and in doing so, they gave me everything. So, I have a question for all of you watching. Have you ever had to make a hard choice, to set a difficult boundary with family not to hurt them, but to save yourself? Let me know your story in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.